Did you know that a commercial lease can have a clause where the landlord can get you out of the business in just 30 days? How about the other clause where they can walk in to your premises even when you're closed and not anyone at your location? Well, this is true. They can. Stay tuned and I will tell you how to find out if your landlord put those clauses in your lease.
Welcome to the one and only Gas Station Business 101 podcast, where you can learn all the secrets about how to start and operate a gas station business successfully and make money. This podcast is brought to you by the good folks at CSB Academy Publishing Company. And now, here is your host, Shabir Hossain.
Welcome to Gas Station Business 101 podcast. I'm Shabir Hossain, and this is episode number 44. This is the only show of its kind where we focus on all aspects of gas station business, and we discuss, analyze, and try to improve the process by trying to see what works and what doesn't. Today's episode and the topic today is a very important one, and it's all about how to read, understand, and identify potential issues in a commercial lease agreement. Commercial lease is a very complex document. It is often 15, 20, even 30 page long, complex document that's written with a lot of legal languages that is very hard to understand for people like me and you. That's why there are times when we take it to an attorney and have them review the lease. And that is often a very good idea. But there are times when we just go ahead and sign the document without giving it a proper review. And I do not recommend any of you ever do that. Always take the time to read that document. And we will discuss a few very important factors today as far as what you need to be looking for in a commercial lease document and what could be a threat or a risk that's written and hidden in that lease. The idea for this episode came from two people, Yash and Jasmine. Thank you so very much to both of you for bringing up such a good topic out in the front for everyone else. So this episode is obviously dedicated to both of you. Now, most commercial leases are complex by nature. And as I said, it is a legal document, but it gets even more complex when it is prepared for a gas station because there are two parts of a gas station business. One is a convenience store part, and then the next one is a fuel part. So you see, it's like combining two business leases into one. So that's when it gets more confusing, especially if your lease is coming from an oil company that owns the location. That's when it can get very, very complicated. And some of the oil companies often tend to put two things together because an oil company always gives you something called an FSA, which is Fuel Supply Agreement, FSA. And then they also give you a commercial lease if they own the property. But usually, these two documents are two separate documents. They shouldn't be combined together. But there are times, some companies do that. But even when they do that, there is a separation in those documents. When you look at one of these documents, you will see that first 15 page is referred to as the lease of the premises. And then the next, let's say another 15, 20 page would be just for the fuel supply agreement. But it is a more common practice to have these two documents separated, but there will be language in each of them which ties one to the other. That means if you break the fuel supply agreement, your lease can automatically get canceled or vice versa. I will get to that more in a minute, but let's move on. Just so you know, I will be talking about a few key points, few very important factors that you would be looking through or you should be looking through when you get a lease that you need to review. If you cannot have it reviewed by an attorney, review it yourself, but look for those key points that I will be discussing today. And to help you out, I will be attaching a copy of a commercial lease. And you will see there are two sections that I used red ink to highlight. That means those were potential risk factors. So it is a full, complete lease for a gas station. So it would be beneficial if you can go to my website, which is www.gasstationbusiness101.com, and go under resources, the tab resources, and you will see a full commercial gas station or filling station lease document. This way, if you look at this lease, you know exactly how a lease looks like and what you should be looking for, what kind of language usually a typical gas station lease carries. Often you will see the lease that you receive maybe 5 pages shorter than what I'm showing you, but I'm showing you an example of a lease that is a long one, and it spells out a lot of things, and it protects the landlord from a lot of different things. Usually a lease is given to you by a landlord, and the lease is always designed to protect the landlord and not you. So remember that. The lease is usually given by a landlord to protect themselves, not you. But again, by law, they cannot do or write something that can be very unethical or completely illegal for that matter. So it has to make sense. It has to be reasonable. That's the word. A lot of times, if you go to court, the judge looks for the word reasonable. You cannot write a contract with unreasonable expectations. So yeah, lease is most often, it is reasonable to a degree. But as you should remember, a lease is always written for the benefit of the landlord and not you. So keep that in mind when you review a lease. In this episode, I will not read every word of a lease or the lease that we will be discussing and the one that you have a copy of that you can get from my website, because it will take a couple of hours to read every word of that lease. But again, that will not benefit you, just me reading the lease to you, because you can read it yourself. What I would like to do instead is, as I said, point out few important factors and some hidden risk potentials, or potential risk rather, in a lease document. So let's get started. There are 18 important parts of a commercial lease agreement that you should really know and identify and read. Number one, identify each party. If you look at a commercial lease, you will see the very first paragraph usually identifies both parties, leasee and lessor. Leasee is who's leasing, means it's you, and lessor is the person that's giving you the lease. So essentially, the first paragraph of every lease usually identifies both parties by name and their company, usually. Let's say you have a company called ABC Food Mart. It's an incorporated company. It's an LLC, S Corp, C Corp. But there is an owner or a manager that is responsible for that company. A lot of the leases will mention them by name of ABC Food Mart, whichever name that your company has. Similarly, it will name the company that's leasing it out to you and probably the owner or the manager's name. Number two is what is for lease. And in this section, the landlord spells out the location, the address, the premises, the description, and all that. What is for lease? Number three would be term of the lease. And that is one of the most important thing. And we all always first look at the term, because this is where the landlord spells out this lease is for how long? What is the duration of the lease? And if there are any potential options to renew that lease. For example, you may see that says this lease is for 5 years from the date of signature, and it will have 2-3 year options to renew at a date when it's usually 60 days before your initial lease expires. But at that time, a lot of the times, these things are not written at the term section, but in a different section where it says, when you go to renew your lease, they can add some increase to the rent. Let's say you're paying $5,000 a month for 5 years. When you go to renew it for next 3 years, which is you're exercising your first right to renew your first option. Let's say your lease came with 2 3-year options. You cannot renew both 3 years at the same time. You have to renew the first 3-year first. I know it sounds confusing, but stay with me. So let's say you notify your landlord that you would like to renew your lease for 3 years. At that point, the landlord can say, the inflation rate has gone up by 5% over the 5 years. So if they want to be nasty, they can add 15-20% increase to your rent, or they can do as low as 10%. I have seen most companies usually do a 10% increase when you first try to exercise your option. But there are people out there that are greedy, and they can go as high as 15, 20, 25%. So at that point, you have an option not to exercise your option, and you have another option, try to sell the business, or third option would be to get out, where I'm sure this is not a good option to get out and lose money by not making any, because if you leave, your business is gone. So third option is not really a great one. But my suggestion would be, when you first get together to sign the initial lease, make sure they spell it out for you, because a lot of the leases don't even mention that, other than a small one-line language somewhere hidden in the lease that says the lease can, at the renewal time, the lease can go up by such and such, or whatever the term they use. So make sure you understand what they will be doing at the end of 5th year or end of 10th year, whichever way the lease works. The initial term is a very important one, and that's what we all look for. How long is my lease for? And once that is coming close to expiring, you need to notify your landlord in writing saying, I would like to renew my lease. And that is often the case. Number 4 is rent. This is where they spell out how much you're paying them as a rent. And this rent can have few other things attached. For example, a gas station rent can have something called base rent. So let's say the lease document that I uploaded to my website, if you're looking at that one, or if you in the future look at it, you will see that in that one it says the base rent is $7,300 a month. In addition to paying base rent, there are other rent related expenses that you most likely will have to pay for a commercial place. For example, if you're leasing a storefront from a small shopping center, they use a term called CAM, C-A-M, Common Area Maintenance. And in that case, your base rent, let's say, is $1,500 for a store, and they may say your CAM is $500 a month. What is CAM? CAM is something that they add for the whole property's insurance. Then the common area maintenance, for example, the parking lot lighting system, the common area parking lot cleanup, and then the landscaping, all those are combined into a sum of money, and then they divide that by all the tenants and their square footage. So if somebody has a bigger store, will pay bigger CAM, versus if somebody has a smaller store, will pay smaller CAM. But in gas station, there are not other tenants to share anything. So that's why most of the gas station leases say there is a base rent, which is the basic rent. And in this case, it is $7,300. And then it says, additional to base rent, there will be property taxes that you need to add to your rent. And the way that usually works is, when you initially sign up, your landlord tells you that, hey, the property tax this year is, let's say, $10,000. So you divide that by 12, and they say you add that money to your rent every month, and then next year, if the tax goes up or down, I will let you know, and you can adjust the payment accordingly, which is fine because you should really pay that property taxes because you're leasing the property, so you're benefiting from that leased premises. Next, they can say you have to provide them with a proof of insurance, or they can say that you also, as an additional rent, will have to reimburse the landlord for the cost of insurance. Because a lot of times the landlords don't feel comfortable you having to buy the insurance. What if you don't buy the right type of insurance? What if you buy less insurance than what the property needs? And in the event of a loss or a fire, if your insurance doesn't cover all the losses and all the rebuilding of the structures. So a lot of times a smart landlord usually goes and buys the insurance and sends you the policy where they name you in the policy as the leasee. So in the event, God forbid, there is a damage, a fire, or anything else, the landlord will be benefiting by having the structure rebuilt, and whatever inside content was there will be replaced by the insurance, but that will benefit you. But in this case, I want to mention something. If in the event your landlord is getting the insurance, you need to make sure that it is a BOP type policy. If you recall from our other episodes where I talked a lot about business owner's policy, it is an important thing to have as far as insurance goes, because a business owner's policy will have clause where they will give you the money for loss of income. For example, if your premises burns down and it takes you 3 months to rebuild that premises, what happens in those 3 months? You don't have any income because your business is not operating. But if you have good insurance, the insurance will pay you the income that you're losing. So there is a clause of loss of income. It will give you that money so you can survive. So in the event your landlord is getting you that insurance, make sure it is a BOP and it has those clauses where you're protected. Not only your landlord, but you are protected. So, there are, as I said, there are clauses like base rent and then property taxes and then insurance. And a lot of times they say if there is any other expenses that can come due to a negligence of the tenant will be paid by the tenant. For example, you did not take care of the lawn or the front yard or the landscaping, and the landlord had to send somebody after repeatedly telling you to take care of it and you haven't, and then they send somebody to do it, they will send you a bill for it. So there are clauses like that in a lot of the leases. You just have to be careful when you read them, and you need to understand what they're talking about. And now, one of the potential problem you will see in the copy of the lease that I posted, inside that rent, there are sub-paragraphs. And the last paragraph says, tenant shall pay to landlord as additional rent 1 cent per gallon if gas sold for all gallons sold in excess of 60,000 per month, and 15 cents per gallon sold for all gallons sold in excess of 80,000 gallons a month. See, that is a potential problem. I will get to it at the end of this episode where I will discuss all the potential problem. So keep an eye out for this type of things, because these are really risky things to have in a lease for the tenant, for you, not for your landlord, but for you. Number 6, payment methods and due dates. This is the section where your landlord spells out when to make the payment, how to make the payment, and where to make the payment. This is a very important part for them because they want to enforce to make sure that you pay rent on time. So most of the cases you will see that it says rent due by the 5th of every calendar month. Some lease says every 1st of the month. Usually they give you a 5 days window. There are leases that will give you 10 days window. But if a lease tells you that it's due by the 1st of the month, that means they're not giving you any time or any window of time at all. In that event, you may have to mail your check 5 or 6 days ahead of time, meaning end of the previous month. So they get it by the first of the month. Remember, if let's say for 3 months in a row they are receiving the rent on the 3rd or the 4th, they will just keep that envelope where there is a date stamp from the post office. And they can create problem for you by sending you a legal notice that, hey, you're not sending your rent on time. If done more frequently after you receive the notice, they can then cancel your lease. So these are the things you need to worry about. Remember, everything that is written on the lease, like I was talking about, the base rent, the insurance, the property taxes, anything you miss to pay or to do is a violation of an agreement, because at the end of the lease, you're signing your name, agreeing to everything that's said in that lease. So anything you don't obey, and I'm using this word obey because that is how it is. If you don't follow and obey whatever is said in the lease, if you have a bad type of landlord that wants to get you, or he's out there to get somebody, then they can keep sending you legal notices every time you miss something. And then after the 2 or 3 of these letters, they can officially terminate your lease. So remember that. But as far as payment methods and due dates, as I said, they give you a window of time depending on the lease, but they also give you an address and a name where to mail the check. And the methods, they will tell you if it needs to be paid by a certified check or by a EFT bank transfer or via a check. So in any event, make sure you understand that part, because let's say they require you to pay by a certified funds and you're just sending them a regular business check, they will not accept it, and that may be a violation of the lease agreement. Number 7 is insurance. In this lease agreement that I uploaded, that you may get to see if you download it, you will see that in this lease, the landlord said that they will carry the property insurance for the property, which oftentimes that is the case. The landlord says, hey, you don't have to worry about property insurance. I'll carry it myself. You just pay me for the property insurance. So whatever the amount is, they will send you a bill with a copy most often. That is the most common practice. They will send you the copy of the bill that they receive from their insurance company. You just reimburse them at the end of the year, or you can divide that into 12 and add it to your rent. But you have to have that agreed upon with both parties when you sign the lease. But in this lease, they say they will carry the property insurance, but the tenant should carry the comprehensive general liability insurance, or they call, oftentimes people use the word called GL, general liability. This is where if somebody trips and fall and files a lawsuit, or one of your employee for some reason, for bad hiring practices, files a lawsuit, any type of lawsuit you may face in a business is covered under general liability. And in this lease, if you read, it says it has to be minimum of $2 million of coverage, because a lot of times when people file lawsuit, they don't file one for $100,000. They often file for millions of dollars. So in this case, they are saying that the tenant has to carry a $2 million general liability insurance. And then you have to have your own content coverage. And again, if you want to have that BOP coverage, which is business owner's policy, I don't think your landlord would mind, because it's beneficial for them as well. Because you will still have interest in your business if your insurance is paying you in the event your store is closed. But they tell you to have the minimum, which is you have to have the general liability, because if you don't, then the landlord may get sued for your mistake. So they don't want that. So they want you to buy a liability insurance, general liability, and show them a proof of insurance. Send them a copy that says, I have this insurance, so don't worry. But as I said, the lease copy that I provided is a very comprehensive one. So it even spells out the things that usually are not spelled out in most other leases, like you have to have liquor liability insurance. Well, in most states, by law, when they give you a beer license or a liquor license, they want to see a copy of your liquor liability insurance. So it's required by the government in most states. But this lease spells that out as well. And then this lease also tells the tenant to carry a business interruption insurance for the leased premises. And it even says for an amount not less than base rent for 3 months, that they're thinking if the business closes for any reason for 3 months and you don't have any income, you're not going to be able to pay the rent. So they're saying carry a business interruption policy. And usually, as I said again, I'm going to use the word one more time, BOP, business owner's policy, usually comes with a business interruption policy or clause that says in the event your business is shut down for a reason that is not controlled by you, they will pay you your expenses or your income, the loss of income. So the loss of income means they will also pay the rent, because without paying the rent, your lease will be canceled. So those are the things that are covered under those type of insurance. And this lease also mentions that any of those insurance policies that you get, you have to name the landlord as an additional insured. Why? Because let's say you have the policy, but you get mad at your landlord and the building just burned down, and you said, I'm not going to call my insurance, I'm not going to file any claim, so I'm leaving. What can the landlord do at that time? Because they cannot call your insurance and say, here, I will file a claim, please rebuild the premises. No, because their name is not on there. So most landlord, whenever you buy insurance, they want you to mention to your insurance company to name your landlord as an additional insured. This way, they have the same right as you do to file a claim on your insurance in the event you do not. So that is a common practice. Don't think it's a red flag, because if you were the landlord, you would want to do the same thing to protect your investment. Now, number 8, indemnity. And let's talk about indemnity. What is indemnity? The word indemnity, by definition, is a security or a protection against a loss or a financial burden. Indemnity is a compensation for damages or loss. It is, in legal sense, may also be referred as an exemption from liability or damages. In a lease, that's what it means, the later part, which is an exemption from liability. So I'm just going to read this section out of that lease. It says, under indemnity, tenant will indemnify landlord and save landlord harmless from and against all claims, actions, loss, cost, including attorney's fees, damages, expenses, and liability, including statutory liability and liability under workmen's compensation laws, in connection with loss of life, personal injury, and or damage to personal arising from or growing out of. Then they list 3 different things, like if somebody is to get hurt at the premises, or if any activities of the tenant or the lease premises, on the lease premises, which are done not by the landlord, but say your agent or a subcontractor or an employee or anybody else that is beyond the landlord's control. So indemnity means you're giving them a free pass. Again, I'm using a term, maybe it's not appropriate in this section, but again, let's just say it's a free pass. The landlord wants you to give them indemnity, means you cannot hold them responsible, or if anybody tries to hold them responsible, you will not let that happen. You will say, hey, I'm the one who's leasing this premises, so anything goes wrong is my responsibility and not my landlord's. That's what you're telling them, and that's what you're agreeing to But in most leases, it is there, and most of the time, you cannot dispute this or say, I don't want to sign this because there is an indemnity clause. So just deal with it, but try to minimize too many subsections under indemnity. Now, number 9, it is assignment. Well, it's not your school assignment. It is assignment or subletting or subleasing for that matter. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with the term subleasing. So in this section, your landlord spells out what you can do and what you cannot do. And simply put, you cannot do anything. You just can lease the property and run it the way the business is supposed to run. Meaning, if the premises is given to your leased to you with an assumption that you will be running it as a gas station, you should be running it as a gas station. You cannot make a fruit stand out of that place. You cannot make a beauty parlor out of that place. You have to run it just as it was intended for, meaning in this case, it is gas station. But it also can tell you or will tell you, you cannot sublease this place or sublet this place. Meaning you started leasing 6 months later, you said, I don't like it, but you didn't tell the landlord. You told one of your buddy and said, hey, listen, I'm paying $5,500 rent. So pay me $5,900 and I'll let you lease this from me. And you draw up a small document and say, here, you lease this from me and I lease it from the landlord, but we don't have to tell the landlord. You just run it and just pay me the lease amount. But you didn't tell the subleasee that your rent is $5,500 while he's paying you $5,900. So you're making $400 and be happy that, hey, somebody else is leasing it. If you do this, your lease will automatically be terminated once the landlord finds out. So the landlord wants to mention this in the lease and have you agree to it, that you cannot do any such thing. Number 10 is maintenance. In this section, the landlord explains how the property should be maintained. And 9 out of 10 gas station leases usually says any maintenance issue is on you as a tenant and not on the landlord. I have seen some lease or a few where the landlord said 2 things I will take care of in a premises that you're leasing. One is the roof and second is the parking lot. There are leases I've seen that says anything underground is my responsibility, anything above ground is the tenant's responsibility. So there are ways people word things, there are ways people agree to different things. So this is a very important factor when you are negotiating for a lease document or agreement. You need to see what is your duty or your responsibility and what is the landlord's responsibility. And the reason is roof is a very expensive thing to fix. Most gas stations have a flat roof. It's not like your house where they only cost a few $1,000s to replace. A gas station has a metal roof. It's a flat roof. It can often leak because it's metal. It can get corroded. And if it starts leaking, it is very hard to fix. And if you want to replace it, it can be in the thousands, like $20,000, $30,000 even. So you need to know what is their responsibility and what is your responsibility. And try to go with one that says anything underground is my responsibility. There are oil companies that still says that. And if it doesn't, well, there is usually not much that goes wrong in under the ground, but there can be. I have had one incident recently where the tank didn't leak, but actual pump that it's called a submerged pump that pumps the fuel out of an underground tank over to the dispenser. That pump went bad. And it was so badly corroded that it took the company that was repairing that thing 3 days to break every part of that motor because they couldn't get it out. They had to break it piece by piece and then re-thread the pipes and all that. And it cost many thousands of dollars. So there are times it is beneficial if your landlord says, yes, I will take care of the roof, the parking lot, and anything underground. That is the ideal situation. But if you cannot get that, be careful, get some tests done, make sure everything is looking good under the ground. Number 11, casualty. Casualty is essentially the same thing what we talked about in insurance, but they like to mention your lease. If your landlord tries to mention same thing 2-3 times. So casualty is where if the building or the premises gets destroyed by fire or hurricane or anything, they want to make sure that your insurance covers that and you name them as co-insured or additional insured, that way they can get their premises back. So that's what it means. Number 12, very important one, right to entry. What is right to entry for a landlord? For a landlord, right to entry is what I said at the very beginning of this episode, that in this segment or this paragraph, a landlord can get very sneaky. I have seen a lease that says they can walk in to the premises that you're leasing at any time they want, as long as they're not disrupting any business. That's how they justified it. And if they went to court, for example, the court would say, yeah, that's good because they're not interrupting your business. That's what they said. So that is reasonable. But in other words, that landlord showed up 2 a.m. and had a locksmith open the door where they walked in and checked everything out. To me, that is unethical. If the landlord needs to visit the premises, which they have a right to do, and many of the landlords try to come and visit the premises once every few months or maybe once a year to make sure their premises is looking the way it should be. Let's say you're not replacing light bulbs that are blown for many months, the water is on the floor, the toilet doesn't work, and all these issues. Well, they all go under maintenance because you're supposed to maintain the store. So they come inspect and make sure the store is in good shape. They usually say it should be in the shape that when I list it to you, whatever the shape you had, it should be at the same shape all the time, meaning everything is operational. So there shouldn't be any problem for right to entry. But the problem is if somebody says, hey, I will sneak into that place at 2 a.m. when nobody's there, I have a problem with that. I think the landlord should visit the premises when it is normal business hour. That way, a manager or the owner or somebody's there to meet and greet them and show them around. So they don't poke around while nobody's there. Because it's your premises. There are a lot of personal and financial documents and different things can be there. Even money, cash money. It is a gas station after all. So I don't want anybody to walk in to my premises if I'm leasing and look around while I'm not there. So I have a problem with that. And I think you should too. So make sure to check and verify the section where it says right to entry. Number 13 is a scary one. It is called default. This is where your landlord spells out everything they can think of as far as what will cancel this document or this lease agreement, how they can throw you out. So in this default, you will see a laundry list of things from, let's say, failure to pay rent on time, or failure to pay additional rent, or if you sublease the place, or that if you file bankruptcy. You get the idea. I mean, as I said, it is a laundry list of things that you can do and that will terminate the lease. It is a good idea to make sure and read and see if there is any unreasonable item in that list. For example, if it has an item such as if you open the premises 2 hours or more delayed for 3 consecutive days, your lease may be terminated. Well, if you're sick and let's say you're late opening your store for 3 days in a row, they shouldn't be able to terminate your lease, and that shouldn't be something reasonable. Not that I have seen one of those, but I'm just giving you an extreme example. So read those and make sure that you understand every one of those items. Number 14 is remedies. Now, this is a good part, and this is where the landlord tells you in the event that you find yourself in default, that you broke some of the essential rules of this lease agreement, what should the landlord do? Well, remedies, it sounds like that it's saying how you can rectify once you defaulted, right? But in legal language, it is very deceiving because it essentially tells you, once you defaulted, how should the landlord react? And that's what they're talking about. They're not talking about rectifying on tenant side. They're saying, once you defaulted, how should the landlord or how will the landlord react? Like, for example, termination. Your lease will be terminated, and then your landlord may enter and take possession of the premises without any other notices or any other things. I mean, it spells out. I mean, if you get to read that lease that I'm posting, please do. You will see there are list of things that they're saying it can happen. It's like a trigger. Once it triggers this, following things will take place. They will come in, take over the premises. They will run it as a business. So you will no longer be the tenant and your lease will be automatically terminated and all that. So there is a vital thing for you to read and understand and see what they're talking about when it comes to the defaults and what are the remedies once you defaulted. It even can spell out like, once you defaulted, the landlord sends you a notice to leave. That notice may have come from an attorney's office. You may even have to pay for that fee of that attorney to write that letter to you. So it can get complicated, and my advice is please do read those line for line and try to understand. And if you don't, ask somebody who understands. Number 15. The landlord in this section, number 15, is personal guarantee. This is where your landlord asks you to sign a personal guarantee. So let's say you cannot afford to pay the rent. The business is not doing well. How does the landlord get his money or get their money? Well, if you're not paying and you sign the personal guarantee, they can then hire an attorney and go after your house or any other possession or property that you have that is valuable. They can come after you, literally. Financially, I should mean. They come, get your house or whatever, and they can sell it, dispose it, and get whatever money you owe them, and they will refund rest of the money to you. So personal guarantee is a very risky thing, but every lease nowadays has one. I haven't seen a lease without a personal guarantee for the last 10 years. Used to be 20 years, 25 years ago, I didn't see any personal guarantee attached to any leases. But in last few years, as I said, 10 years or so, I have seen this become the new norm, where every company attaches a personal guarantee with the lease. And you have to sign it. Without that, the lease document is not finalized. Number 16 is brand identification and minimum standard. Well, not every gas station lease would have this item. This one has it because it's a branded gas station, and the landlord wants to make sure, let's say this is a Chevron brand or a Citgo brand. The landlord wants to make sure you maintain all the standards of such company, Exxon, Chevron, Mobil, whoever it is. You carry that brand. So you need to make sure you fulfill all your duties as far as their brand requirements, so you don't get debranded. You know, if you're running a gas station, let's say a Shell station, if you fail their mystery shopper program 3 times in a row, they will rebrand you. And this is what the landlord is trying to prevent. And I don't blame them for doing so, because if, let's say, you leased out a Shell gas station, a year later you got debranded, then the property value will go down for his gas station, because it used to be a Shell, now it's an unbranded gas station. So they put this clause in most branded fuel station that says you need to maintain the standard of the brand that you're carrying. Number 17, additional exhibits and attachments. Most leases will have many more attachments just like a personal guarantee. By the way, personal guarantee is an attachment. At the end of the lease, you will see Exhibit A, B, C, D, where one of them may be a legal description of the property. Exhibit B or attachment B would be the personal guarantee. C may be some other type of document that they refer back to the lease time to time and say, Exhibit C has whatever we're talking about in this clause. So there might be other attachment, and you need to be very careful looking at those attachments. And the only reason I'm not mentioning anymore, because as I said, it can vary widely as far as what attachment can come with a lease. Number 18, the last one and the important one, potential risk factors to look for. One, as I said at the very beginning of the lease, that a landlord can have a clause where they can throw you out of this business in just 30 days. I have seen that in leases with my own eyes that says either landlord or the tenant can terminate this lease agreement with just 30 days written notice. Now, remember I said landlord, even though the lease is written to protect the landlord, but they cannot write something unreasonable. So let's say in the event the landlord wrote, the landlord can cancel the lease with a 30-day notice, would be unreasonable. But see, they got smart and they said either the landlord or the tenant. So they're giving option to both parties that can cancel the lease with 30 days notice. And anybody looks at it say, hey, it's fair because this option is given to both parties. Well, tenants, most of the time, if the business is doing well, they don't want to cancel the lease because they went through quite a bit of expense getting this gas station. So why would they want to leave in 30 days notice? It is the landlord who may want to get you out. Let's say you're doing very well in your business and the landlord says, hey, business is doing well, so I can maybe lease it to somebody else for $2,000 more. So all I got to do is serve this person a 30-day notice, get him out, get somebody else in, and I get more rent. So this is a big, big red flag and a big hazard to your livelihood. So make sure you read and understand and see if there is such a red flag exist in your lease. Now, let's look at this lease that I have attached here that you may be looking at. On the very first page, under the term, right after the term, it says, and let me add the first thing first. It is a very uncommon thing to see under terms or right after terms, right before rent. It is very unusual. I marked it with red color, so you will see it says right to sell. And it says landlord shall have the right to sell any of the leased premises at any time during the term of this lease agreement without prior consent of tenant. This sale shall be made subject to the lease agreement. Well, the landlord is telling you that they can sell the property at any given time without letting you know. To me, that's a bad idea. As the landlord, to add that the tenant holds the right to the first refusal, meaning the landlord has to come to you first if they want to sell the property. They need to give you the first right of refusal. That means they need to give you the first option. Say, hey, do you want to buy my property? And they have to give you a fair price because let's say it's a gas station. They have to get it appraised and they will offer you an appraised value. Say, my station is valued at $1 million. So I'm offering it to you for $1 million. Would you like to buy it? And if you refuse to buy it, then they can sell it to somebody else as long as the lease document that you're holding will be honored by the new owners. See, a lease is a binding document. It's an agreement. It cannot be voided just because the premises has been sold. So the new owner has to honor that lease. And that is a very common practice because let's say if you end up in court, the judge wants to see, hey, just because you sold the property doesn't mean this guy has to lose his business. So the lease has to be honored for the duration of its term. So if you have a 5-year lease and 3 years after you lease the property, your owner sold it to somebody else, that owner, that new owner, has to honor the lease for next 2 years. And then when you go to renew the lease, they have an option to say, I don't want to renew your lease anymore. Or they can say, I would like to renew your lease, but instead of you paying $5,000 rent, which you have been paying, now your rent is $10,000. Well, you have no recourse of anything because most likely that thing was not mentioned in your lease. So the new owner can do whatever they want. So be careful about these kind of things and look for those red flags. And the last thing, remember I mentioned that they can right to entry. They can walk into your place at any given time. Make sure it's not spelled that way in your lease. It should say the landlord can visit the premises during normal business hours. That is the most common approach to this issue. Hopefully, I was able to answer some of the questions that some of you have had as far as commercial lease. And I'm sure once you read the lease, you may have a lot of questions. And even though I'm not an attorney, if you think I may be able to answer the question, feel free to send me an email and I'll try my best. Now, a couple of quick announcements before we finish here today. I'm still seeing people registering for my forum on my site. But as I mentioned before in previous episodes, that this forum is not working properly. So please join my Facebook group instead. And there you can post questions, comments, and get quick answers to any questions you may have. But remember, it's easy to join that Facebook group. Just type my name, ShabbirHussain.net. This is a domain redirect that will take you right to my Facebook group. And I'm sure most of you are already on Facebook at least once a day. So in this event, you don't have to sign on to a new site to ask a question or anything such as that. You can do it directly from your Facebook. Now, if you'd like for me to cover any other topic that I haven't yet, like Yash and Jasmine sent me this email to cover the commercial lease, and Yash said to cover the fuel supply agreement, which the next episode will be all about fuel supply agreement. And as I said, anybody that mentions a topic that becomes an episode will be dedicated to that person. So as you all know, this episode has been dedicated to Yash and Jasmine. So if any of you have any idea of a topic that I haven't covered, by all means, post it on the Facebook group, or you can directly send me an email at shabbir@gasstationbusiness101.com. Lastly, I want to send a big thank you to Nitin Gawani. I hope I was pronouncing his name right. Nitin, I sure do appreciate your kind words as you gave me a 5-star review on iTunes. So if you're listening, a big thanks goes to you, and I sure do appreciate it. Now, don't forget to sign up for my newsletter. And I know I'm late sending you the next batch of emails that I have promised and I haven't, and I've been busy, and that's not an excuse. I'm sorry. So I will get on it. I will start sending out the next batches of email newsletters because I know there are some very valuable information that I'm sharing, as those of you who have subscribed to my newsletter already in a month or so before already received the very first sequence of the email that says how to find a gas station the most effective way to buy. And the next sequence of that series would tell you how to do due diligence for that business, for a new gas station. Then another one would be, the next one on that sequence would be how to find good financing, and then how to do closing. This is a series of emails that I will be sending, and the first one already went out about a month and a half ago. So anybody that have signed up in between this time, let's say in last month and a half, will be receiving the first email that they missed. And anybody that is signing up now will start receiving all these emails in a sequence every few weeks, or every couple of weeks, I should say. So please, by all means, sign up. will not cost you a dime, but in return, you may receive some valuable information that you can use at your fingertip at any given time in your business. Next week, as I said, I will have the very important episode about fuel service agreement and how to read and analyze that document. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, take good care of yourself, and I will see you soon.
This has been the one and only Gas Station Business 101 podcast with your host, Shabir Hossein. This podcast was brought to you by CSB Academy Publishing Company. Be sure to join us next time as we share with you the secrets about how to start and operate a gas station business successfully and make money.